الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
السلام عليكم.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وسبحان الله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين نحمده ونشكره ونستعين به ونستهديه فإنه حق من هدى الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونصلي ونسلم ونبارك على الحبيب المصطفى النبي الأمين محمد خاتم الأنبياء والرسل أجمعين المرسل رحمة للعالمين وعلى آله الأطهار الميامين وعلى أصحابه المختارين وعلى من اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم يا علي يا عظيم إنا نبتهل إليك وندعوك ونستجير بك فنسألك أن تقسم لنا من خشيتك ما يحيل بيننا وبين معاصيك وأن تقسم لنا من رحمتك ما يقربنا من طاعتك. ويا الله يا رب العالمين أن ترزقنا من اليقين ما يهون علينا مصائب الدنيا وأحداثها. A human being like the mystery of life itself is an enduring puzzle, because consciousness, the very fact of consciousness, the very intractable ways that constitute an intellect defy definition. But a human being, whatever the mysteries of life are, and whatever mysteries behind the remarkable, brilliant, majestic reality of the intellect, and the even more majestic and more brilliant and more elusive majesty of the heart. But a human being is marked by concrete stands. You are what you stand for, and what you stand for are the sum total of moments where something needed to be said or done, and how you met the challenge of these moments. The very nature of life, the very logic of creation, is that from the moment that we gain consciousness and slowly grow into adulthood, the logic of creation, the logic of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is as Allah says, to test each one of us, through each one of us. We are the test for each other. So, from the moment of creation, a human being is presented with occasions that present a challenge in which a human being is called upon to prove their mettle. A human being is called upon to say something or to do something, and their choice is what will define them in the eyes of God, where it really matters. What you choose to say when something needs to be said, what you choose to do when something needs to be done, is ultimately what will create your record. And whether you choose to recognize this record or not, for a believer knows that the record exists, whether you acknowledge it or not, whether you recognize it or not. That there is a constant record of how you choose and how you've chosen to confront and deal with each of these challenges that Allah has presented you through your existence. When the situation calls upon you to warn someone of an impending disaster. So for instance, you see a car hurling down the road towards a child in the middle of the road. If your choice is silence, that is a moral choice, and you bear the moral consequences of that choice. If the car strikes the child, while you had the opportunity to warn and possibly to save a life, you are culpable for the silence. Now, whether in fact the child heeded the warning or would have heeded the warning or not is immaterial. It could turn out, after all, that the child that you tried to warn was deaf and couldn't have heard you. And so ultimately, your warning would have had no consequence. Nevertheless, because you did not know that this child was deaf, and because you had the opportunity to warn, and because you failed on your moral obligation to attempt to warn, you are culpable. Even if the disaster was unavoidable. You see, morality does not hold you accountable for the consequences. Morality holds you accountable for the way that you chose to discharge duties that confronted you at the time they confronted you. And duties, by their very nature, are contextual. So, if you in the hereafter explain to God that God, well, I didn't warn the child. I didn't attempt to warn the child about the danger of the car approaching, coming down the road, because in the privacy of my room, the day before, I stood before a mirror and warned the children of the world about the danger of cars driving down the road. Well, that's nice, but you've discharged a moral duty in a context that is entirely irrelevant. And therefore, you did not discharge the duty at all. What many Muslims have forgotten, that this is precisely the art of Sharia. The art, the morality, the ethics of Sharia is to discharge the correct duty in the correct context, not to discharge any duty in any context, and not to simply sound off a group or a list of hypothetical duties without a context. Those who understand the path of Sirat al-Mustaqim, the path of Sharia, the path of An-Nur, luminosity, Allah's light, understand that life presents a series of contexts, one context after the other. And the true Shari'i challenge, the true challenge of Allah's applied law and Allah's applied morality is to respond appropriately to the context as it presents itself. So, if someone, for instance, gives brilliant lectures about the obligation of Ghadd al-Basar, and Ghadd al-Basar is to lower your gaze, but every lecture they give has to do with lowering your gaze towards the sisters in a mosque on weekends in the particular Islamic center which they find themselves. But they consistently ignore the actual reality that the minute they step out of that center, perhaps that center, and let's take hypothetically, let's imagine a center that is but blocks away from an LA-style beach where naked bodies abound. But that brother consistently talks about Ghadd al-Basar, lowering the gaze, in the Islamic center, as applied only to the sisters within the center, completely ignoring the reality outside that center, where lowering the gaze must deal with new nuances, new permutations, new conditionalities, where lowering the gaze has to take into account things like pornography, the net, movies, film. Has this person discharged their moral obligation? And the answer is no. Islam is not a license to divorce reason or to divorce proper ethical thinking. The ABCs of ethics is that you affirm the ethical principle and you apply the ethical principle to an actual living situation. If what you master is the affirmation of ethical principles, but your perception of the challenges to these ethical principles is skewed because you misperceive reality, or you choose to ignore reality, or because you misunderstand reality, have you discharged your ethical obligations? And the answer is clearly no. Take, for instance, a person who is learned in medicine. Every time I meet this person, they can go on talking about all types of diseases and all types of remedies that can treat diseases. But then I show up extremely ill, presenting myself to this person, and I say, what illness do I have? What medicine do I need? And they look at me and say, that's entirely irrelevant to my work. Is this truly a learned person? The regurgitation of principles divorced from context. Do we really have a medical expert? This is so much like the Muslim condition. The Islam that dictatorial governments around the world support, the Islam of the Egyptian government, the Islam of the Saudi government, the Islam of the Emirati government. But not only that, but the Islam that Israel wants, the Islam that the colonizers of the Muslim world want, the Islam that the Swedish government wants, that the Austrian government wants, that the Australian government wants, that the American government wants, that the British government wants, the Islam that the Hindu government wants, the Islam that the Chinese government wants, the Islam that is desired by all these parties is an Islam that regurgitates the abstract principles. The doctor, or so-called doctor, who sits there and describes diseases, but is unable to cure a single patient. The Islam that pronounces principles, but consistently fails to deal with the challenge, the moral challenge of the moment. All these parties from the Egyptian to the Saudi to the Emirati to the Israelis to the Americans to the British to the Austrian to the Australian to the Russian to the Chinese. In the 80s, they used to say fundamentalist Islam. Then it became militant Islam. Then it became jihadi Islam. And now they use the expression political Islam to describe the Islam that doesn't just talk about the moral value of saving the lives of children, but does nothing. What they describe as political Islam is the Islam that indeed exercises or practices trying to warn the child in the road, regardless of whether the child can hear or not, regardless of whether you end up saving a life or not. But it is the Islam of moral and ethical practice. In order to obtain this result, in order to neutralize the threat of real Islam, in order to get an Islam of proclamations, but absolutely of no applications, they must convince you that common sense, that normal human ethical thinking is irrelevant to your faith, and that in order to use the intellect to reason through a moral choice and a moral challenge, you need mystical levers from within your religion. It is as if they're saying, in your religion, before you can yell out to try to save the child in the middle of the road, you need to go through very complex processes of licensing and permission by duly authorized authorities. So first you have to go to the people with the mystical powers and ask them, did I really see the child in the road? Is there a road? Is the car really barreling down this road? And if it's all true, am I permitted to warn the child? Well, how high am I permitted to yell out? Should I call once? Should I call twice? And they want to then engage you into all of that and tell you that your religion doesn't give you the license to use your moral common sense, because there is no place in your religion for moral common sense. The mystification of the will of God and the alienation of the will of God into a secret code that is only accessible to men of power that are chosen by other men in power. So, before I can even think about exercising a moral choice, I need to go to the clergy chosen by Sisi in Egypt, or I need to go to the clergy chosen by the Saudi government, or I need to go to the clergy chosen by the Emirati government, and I have to keep my silence until given permission by the keepers of the so-called mystical divine secret. That is an absolute corruption of the divine will. Islam liberated the human will. Islam broke the chains of permission and license to access God, to speak with God, and to speak on behalf of God. Islam appealed to your common sense when it said read and think. When it said that you are personally accountable for how you handle a moral challenge as it presents itself. Islam criticized the priestly class, the rabbinic class, because they alienated God and made God's will remote and alien. Last khutbah, I told you I could not confirm whether scholar Awad al-Qarni was sentenced to death in Saudi Arabia. And sadly, I have confirmed it. And when you pause and you think about why, like someone like Awad al-Qarni, why would a sheikh like Awad al-Qarni be sentenced to death in the land of the Prophet ﷺ? Well, I realize that very few people in the United States read Awad al-Qarni or listened to his lectures. But it is one of these moments. Awad al-Qarni was the type of Muslim intellectual that criticized judiciaries that lack independence and lack integrity. Awad al-Qarni made an obvious point that one of the firm principles of Islam is due process for justice, and that everything that the Prophet ﷺ taught about how the judiciary ought to be underscores the independence and moral integrity of the judiciary as a necessary institution for the possibility of justice. Awad al-Qarni said what so many of us intuitively know about the role of shura and the importance of shura as an ethical value in Islam, and that Islam condemns despotism and authoritarianism in all its forms. Awad al-Qarni raised questions about the lack of independence and lack of integrity when it comes to teaching experts in religion how to think, how to analyze. And for that, he has been sentenced to death. Another major Muslim scholar who is likely to be killed by the Saudi state at any time. The blood of the scholar will testify against all of us in the hereafter. His son is here in the United States. And I am sure that his son, like the son of Salman al-Auda, Abdullah, suffers from the neglect and isolation and moral laziness and moral cowardliness of the Muslim community. Look at the Islam that all the forces that are today allied against Islam, from the Egyptian government to the Saudi government to the Emirati government to the Russian government to the Chinese government to the American government to the British government to Sweden to Australia to Austria, all of these governments, not a single word about a grossly, shockingly unjust sentencing a scholar according to the very papers of his conviction, who's never committed an act of violence, never encouraged an act of violence, who is sentenced to death solely for his speech. And yet, all these governments not only have nothing to say about the situation, but even more, they want to convince you that the type of Islam that is Allah's Islam is that we look at a situation like this and say, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, and just go on, as if it doesn't concern us. As if the pain of the family, of the Qarni's family, is not our pain. As if the pain of Salman al-Auda's family is not our pain. As if these are not the guardians of Islam and the protectors of Islam, because they articulate the living conscience of Islam. The Saudi government also arrested Salih al-Shami and his son. Salih al-Shami is about 90 years old. He is a scholar of hadith, has written numerous books about the Sunnah, the Seerah, the authentication of hadith, commentaries of hadith. But the Saudi government has decided to move against and arrest a large number of Syrians living in Saudi. Among them was Salih al-Shami, a major scholar, someone who has lived an entire career serving hadith science and hadith tradition as he sees it, arrested, disappeared, with his age very doubtful that he will survive, and not a word. None of those who go on about freedom of speech and human rights raised a peep. And again, the Islam that is being created and supported is an Islam that tells you it doesn't concern you. Move on. It doesn't matter. I found an article that was published in 2011, more than 10 years ago, that talk about how Mecca was being turned into a Las Vegas of the Middle East. The article, written 10 years ago, talked about the destruction of 400 Islamic historical sites as the Saudi government reshaped the cosmopolitan face of Mecca, turning it from a shrine to Islam to a shrine, a living shrine to capitalism. And in the article, there is the voice of a few Saudi dissidents that talk about the atrocities being committed by the Saudi government against Islamic historical sites. Not only did the Saudi government destroy the house of Khadija, the house of Abu Bakr, but the Saudi government even destroyed the grave sites for a number of Sahaba in order to turn Mecca into a living shrine for capitalism, to turn Mecca into a playground for the rich. Article that was published 10 years ago, warning that among the sites at risk is the Ottoman and Abbasi columns of the Grand Mosque in Mecca. I checked, they're now gone. That among the sites at risk is Jabal al-Nur, where the Prophet ﷺ first received his revelation. And Jabal al-Nur has been altered permanently and irreversibly. Parts of it has been demolished, its historical character completely changed. Now, I've confirmed what I feared and mentioned last khutbah, that the Saudi government is destroying Jabal Uhud. This is the mountain that the Prophet ﷺ said, this is a mountain that we love and it loves us. Well, that mountain that the Prophet ﷺ said loves us and we love is now in the process of vanishing. I confirmed it. But the only voice that I found loudly meeting the challenge, the moral challenge of the moment, was the voice of a non-Muslim, C.G. Whirlman. A brilliant voice, a masterful voice, a brave voice, but not a Muslim voice. The Islam that all these powers that I've mentioned want is an Islam that sees the house of the Prophet ﷺ destroyed and says nothing. Sees Mecca turned into Las Vegas and says nothing. Sees Jabal Uhud razed to the ground and turned into a hospital or a medical resort and says nothing. Now, I also confirmed something that C.J. Worman talked about, but I was very reluctant to believe until I've actually done my own research, that the Saudi government is seriously talking about moving the grave of the Prophet ﷺ from the masjid in Medina. And some of the plans propose to move the gravesite altogether to an undisclosed location, while other plans say that we should rebuild the masjid of Medina so that the gravesite of the Prophet is no longer within the masjid. So you can visit the masjid, but you don't even run into the gravesite of the Prophet. And then the gravesite of the Prophet would be closed off to the public. Look, if Muslims actually stopped pretending that they are practicing morality when they get together in their mosques and their Islamic centers and, like children playing dolls, they engage in these bizarre performances of moral pretenses that has to do separating men from women, moral pretenses that have to do with whatever food they consume, moral pretenses that have to do with your brother and akhi and sister and assalamu alaikum, all the moral pretenses that they engage in, and actually pay attention to the world that they live in. Do you realize that in one incident, Allah is as if summarizing the entire moral challenge of our historical moment in a single demonstrative incident? What else would you say? When a country like Austria moves to arrest 100 Muslims and brings charges of terrorism against a most prominent Muslim academic, Hafiz Farid, a Muslim academic who became famous for publishing an academic periodical on Islamophobia called the Islamophobia Yearbook. For his academic and intellectually rigorous studies on Islamophobia, the Austrian government invaded his home, terrorized his family, arrested him, froze his assets, destroyed his life. Not only that, but an Austrian judge dared say that studies on Islamophobia is supporting of terrorism, is terrorist activity, to be reversed later on. And after destroying this academic's career in Austria, he is forced to escape He's now at Williams in the United States. A challenging moment in history. Imagine if this happened to a Jewish academic. This happened to a Muslim academic, and instead of finding hundreds of thousands of people saying, "Can I please write you a check? Can I please support you in any way?" Instead of finding hundreds of Muslim organizations saying, "We are outraged. We must bring all attention to this egregious precedent." I am sure, without even having ever talked to Hafiz Fareed, that none of that happened. Because I know Muslims, and I know their fake morality. I know their false morality. I know that they will sit there and do all types of cartwheels because they don't like a woman's hijab. But when it comes to hard work, like protesting the treatment of a scholar of Islamophobia, that's too hard. You want to go play house in our little Islamic centers, where we have the medical doctors and the engineers and the computer scientists and the businessmen pretend that they're Islamic scholars and pretend that they're meeting the challenges of the world, and they pretend that they're fighting for Islam. And then after we do that, we can all go home and have a nice dinner and fill our bellies and raise our children. Listen, someone sent me a notice about a documentary produced by the BBC about the genocide against Muslims in India. I watched 7 minutes of that documentary. In those 7 minutes, a Muslim testifies how he was stopped on the way. Him and his family were forced to lower their trousers because the Hindu extremists that stopped them wanted to see if they're circumcised. And upon discovering that they're Muslim, his family members were assaulted and killed and maimed. But I couldn't see the rest of the documentary. And the most incredible thing is that I couldn't see the rest of the documentary because Modi's government and because wealthy Indian businessmen exerted so much pressure on Elon Musk, so that Elon Musk ordered that this documentary that documents Modi's direct involvement in the genocide against Muslims, so that Elon Musk ordered this documentary removed from YouTube and Twitter and social media. And my mind was boggled. Hindu businessmen are willing to sacrifice hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars, to cover up their hatred of Islam, to cover up their criminal activity against Muslims, to defend a criminal, a Nazi, a fascist like Modi, to cover up the comfortable butchering and raping of Muslims in India and Kashmir. Where are the wealthy Muslim men and women? Why isn't someone like C.G. Whirlman swimming in Muslim money? Why isn't he being empowered with millions of dollars donated by Muslims. No. Muslims like to play morality, not practice morality. They like to go on C.G. Woolman's site, say, thank you. Thank you for saying an honest word about Islam. But do what ethically matters. Sacrifice your own luxury and comfort and write the man a check. Learn to support your cause with your money. Learn to testify with your money. Learn to be effective. Learn to uphold morality in practical, dynamic, practical ways. No. No. We want to give money to places that will treat us like kings. That will say, Dr. Mahmoud, Dr. Ahmed, come give a khutbah. Come give us a nice lecture about Laylat al-Qadr. Immoral. One word applies. Immoral. Morally bankrupt. Shame on us. Shame on all of us. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم وأسأل الله يستجب لكم. There is a storm, a raging ocean, and people floating on a small boat in this ocean that needs saving. Those who want to rise to the challenge of true jihad. Yes, that word that has become a dirty word because the Americans, the Canadians, the Austrians, the Egyptians, the Saudis want it to become a dirty word. But those who want to practice true jihad will get on a boat, ride the waves, try to reach that boat in danger, and rescue those who need to be rescued. No, we Muslims have chosen another model. It is the Muslim model, the Saudi model, the Egyptian model, the Emirati model, the Zaytuna model, the model that the Austrians want, and the Swedes want, and the Danish want. We stand at the shore and we play pretend. Let's pretend that someone is in danger and I will come to save you. Let those who drown in the ocean drown. That doesn't concern us. What concerns us is our little plaything that we do on the safety of our oceans, of our shores. So yet again, like every week, this time 10 Palestinians, it was 9 just a couple of days ago, now it's 10. 10 Palestinians have been murdered by Israel. Another Palestinian village is going to be demolished by Israel. The news story again is here. Ben Gvir again violates the sanctity of the Aqsa Mosque. And again, with the massacre, with Ben Gvir violating the sanctity of the Aqsa Mosque, Israel and the United States continue talking about how they're going to have peace with the Saudis, with the Emiratis. Everyone is ignoring what Israel is doing to the Palestinians. Not only that, but UNRWA, the United Nations organization that was created to take care of Palestinian refugees, is complaining that they have struck an all-time low in Muslim donations to the agency that takes care of Palestinian refugees in the world. They don't have enough to feed the Palestinian refugees. They don't have enough to help them run their schools. They don't have enough to keep their hospitals open. They don't have enough. And the Islam that we keep learning in our institutions is an Islam of moral irrelevance. If it's an Islam of amorality. I wonder, what are we going to tell Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when Allah talks about all the sites that was loved by our Prophet ﷺ, the Mecca that he loved, the Medina that he loved, the Islamic historical sites that survived for hundreds of years until Al Saud took over Mecca. When we are asked about the blood of scholars, when we are asked about those who tried to stand and speak the truth and found no support, or found little support. I have been doing this now 30 years. I've been offered bribes, very lucrative bribes, to shut up. Support? No. I have gotten to the point that I pray to Allah that the reason I have not found support is that people find me personally obnoxious, so that it doesn't represent anything about the Islamic Ummah. Because truly, if it does, we are all in massive, huge trouble. All that Allah demands of us is what Allah demanded of His Prophet ﷺ. فَاصْدَعْ بِمَا تُؤْمَرْ. فَاصْدَعْ بِمَا تُؤْمَرْ. Declare the truth. Speak out the truth. The consequences, read Surah Al-Hajj, the consequences you're not responsible for. But recognize the truth and declare the truth. فَاصْدَعْ بِمَا تُؤْمَرْ. Don't whisper the truth. Don't just keep the truth deeply buried in your heart, but shout it out. Yell it out to signal a point. Make your moral record. If you cannot shout with your voice, in today's age, all causes need support, need financial support. Shout out support for the truth through material support. Make your money testify for you. Allahumma aghfir lana, Allahumma afu anna, Allahumma arhamna, Allahumma ahdina li aqraba min hadha rashada ya Ali ya Azim. Allah forgive our sins. Allah grant us guidance. Lead us to the light and to the straight path. Allah make us effective speakers and effective witnesses to the truth. Ya Ali Ya Azim. وصلي وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين، وأقم الصلاة.